So my question is, what does available research tell us about the potential impact which rape myths and other misconceptions have on jury deliberations in rape cases? So I'll come to Professor Thomas first.
Thank you. And a welcome to my colleagues who are online. Well, I guess the first thing to say is it really depends upon which jurisdiction you're referring to, and I provided a written submission to the committee to try and set out some of the contrast between the amount of empirical evidence you have about the jury system in Scotland compared to the empirical evidence in England and Wales. So I'm here really to provide you with information about the research that I've conducted in England and Wales and some other jurisdictions over the last 20 years. And in relation to rape myths and stereotypes, the two main aspects of the research that we've looked at in the UCL Jury Project is jury conviction rates in rape and sexual offences cases, and we have been conducting a very detailed analysis of every single jury verdict against every defendant in every court in England and Wales over the last 15 years, and that applies to rape offences as well as any other offences. And that's important in terms of having an understanding of the relative conviction rates when juries deliberate to reach a verdict on a rape offence compared to other offences. Our analysis of all of those verdicts is that juries in England and Wales are more likely to convict than they are to acquit in rape cases, and we've done a very detailed analysis of 10 different types of rape offences, and the jury conviction rate ranges from 65% to 91%, depending upon the age of the complainant and the sex of the complainant, or whether it's a historical offence or not. We also did some research seeing juries post-verdict, and we asked them about their particular views about rape and sexual offences. And in that research, what we found is that, contrary to sort of popular belief, those individuals who are doing jury service in England and Wales do not overwhelmingly believe rape myths and stereotypes, that there are a few issues where they could do with some additional information to ensure that they're not confused by issues. But if you marry up those two pieces of research, there isn't evidence in England and Wales to suggest that juries are biased against complainants in sexual offences cases on a systematic basis.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Professor Munro, I think I said I would bring you in next, so would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to give the evidence today, and also to the committee for allowing us to do it by Zoom when Storm Jocelyn intervened. I think that what I might start by saying is that identifying and understanding jury decision-making is obviously a complicated matter. There are always going to be inevitable difficulties around getting into the heads of jurors to uncover what's informing their evaluations of the evidence. And those difficulties are then compounded when you're trying to predict the effects on verdict outcome, given the specific and unique nature of each trial, as well as the complicated ways in which group interactions during the deliberation process can impact on perspectives and narratives. There are inevitably, I think, pros and cons to various different approaches that we might take to try to better understand the jury decision-making process, and that's perhaps something that we might come back to discuss further. But in terms of what we have set out in our submission, it does paint a somewhat different picture from what Professor Thomas has presented already, although there are important areas of commonality as well. Our submission is largely based on a number of previous studies which have relied on simulation methods to better understand the dynamics of the deliberation process by providing participants with mock simulations and looking at how they deliberate in those very grounded and communal environments towards their deliberations, which the research suggests might give a more nuanced understanding of attitudes than just simply asking through abstract questionnaires, do you think X or Y? In our submission, we rely heavily, of course, on the findings of the Scottish mock jury study, which myself, Professor Chalmers and other colleagues were involved in conducting. But those findings also sit in the context of a wider body of evidence, including other simulation studies in England and Wales, which have spanned in total between that and the Scottish jury study over 1,500 participants, as well as other international studies involving mock and real jurors, and including sort of post-deliberation interviews with those real jurors, including work in New Zealand. What we have found fairly consistently across that evidence is that it's obviously, as I said at the start, difficult to track a kind of linear trajectory from individual views expressed in deliberations to verdict outcomes, but there were certainly prominent themes that have consistently marked those juror discussions. In particular, jurors often expressing expectations regarding signs of resistance and physical injury in order to consider a complaint and a complainer to be credible. Focusing on the behaviour of complainers before, after and during the incident to provide evidence of consent or at least a reasonable belief therein, including things like accepting a lift from the accused or receiving compliments or drinking alcohol in the company of the accused. More than half of the juries in the Scottish study, it was expressed during their deliberations, sometimes quite repeatedly, the view that false allegations of rape are routinely made and that should be borne in mind when assessing the credibility of the particular claim. So, taking all of that evidence together, our view would be that there is certainly a credible basis for concern regarding the role that misconceptions and misunderstandings of rape, rapists and rape complainers might be playing in that deliberation process. And obviously Professor Thomas has mentioned her research, which suggested that there perhaps wasn't, in her assessment, overwhelming evidence of a source for concern, but we would just flag as part of that there were nonetheless in that study still some quite significant findings there regarding certain attitudes which continued to be held. So, for example, 27% of the respondents reported that they either agreed or were unsure if they agreed with the statement that it's difficult to believe rape allegations that aren't reported immediately. 17% agreed or were unsure if they agreed that a woman who wears provocative clothing puts herself in a position to be raped, for example. And our argument would be that in the context of group deliberations in particular cases, that uncertainty of view can often be amplified and have a more significant impact.
Okay, thank you, Professor Munro, a lot in there, and so I will swiftly move on to Professor Chalmers and bring you in. Over to you.
Thank you, Kavita, and thank you to the committee for its flexibility as well in allowing me to give evidence by Zoom. I would agree with a lot of what's been said so far. We just emphasise the difficulty that colleagues have mentioned about actually unravelling just what is going on sometimes with rape with allegations. As Professor Thomas said in her own submission, as human beings, we can't consciously know all the factors that influence our individual decisions. So identifying exactly when rape myths are having this effect is difficult to do. Individuals who are asked about abstract statements that indicate agreement or otherwise with rape myths may well realise that certain answers are socially unacceptable and shy away from giving them, and nevertheless rely upon them explicitly or unconsciously in deliberations. What we can say, as Professor Munro said, is from the Scottish jury research, we did see a significant extent of jurors expressing and explicitly relying upon rape myths within deliberations. What we cannot do, given the nature of that research, is quantify exactly what difference that made to outcomes. That's not easy or perhaps possible to do in the context of group deliberations, and also all of our jurors were watching the same trial. We can't therefore say how they would have reacted had there not been a basis for that particular myth to be expressed, if that was something that could be excluded by the design of the trial materials. There is, as Professor Thomas has noted in her submission, an issue about the comparability of conviction rate data between Scotland and England, and a slightly unsatisfactory situation, I think, regarding the data that is available about conviction rates. That may be something that we come back to. The latest data, I understand, shows a conviction rate of 48%, and that is of all cases, including guilty pleas. It doesn't explicitly give details of the plea rate in rape cases. We know from the Dorian review that in sexual offences in the High Court generally, that is 19% in the High Court. So that does suggest the conviction rate is rather lower in Scotland. I think you have heard evidence already from the Lord Advocate suggesting a conviction rate of 20 to 25% in what she described as acquaintance-type rapes. So there may well be a difference there. It's not one that we can easily, I think, bottom out from the published data.